Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today let's talk about all of the best books I've read of the year so far. Lot of great books that I wasn't able to fit in talking about when I was doing the mid-year freakout tag, and a couple of you said that you would love to see a just best books of the year so far list. So I am here to share with you all of my favorite books that I've read. These are all 4 stars and above. I'm not going to go in depth into like every single synopsis of these books, but I'll give you just a quick review, a quick recommendation based on a couple of keywords for each one. So hopefully this helps you find some new books to add to your own TBR. But before we get into those books, I'd like to once again thank Book of the Month for partnering with me again on an additional video this month, because if you didn't know, Book of the Month has started a new podcast called The Virtual Book Tour that is available on Apple and Spotify for free to listen. And they recently interviewed the author of the new book, Upgrade by Blake Crouch. Upgrade is one of their book selections for this month, the month of July, and it was one of the books I selected for my Book of the Month. This was so highly anticipated for me because I love dark matter, I loved recursion, so I was just so excited to check out any further Blake Crouch I could. I love his style of sci-fi thriller, so I was able to listen to the interview they did with Blake Crouch on the Virtual Book Tour podcast that I will link the information for down below. And honestly, that interview just got me even more excited to check this one out, because from that interview, they talked a lot about the philosophical questions that get raised in this book. If you don't know, Upgrade is following the very near future where it is questioning whether or not genetic modification is a pro or a con. Is it a good thing or a bad thing for society? And it kind of challenges the reader with two sides of the argument to decide, is this something that is benefiting us, or is this something that could make things potentially worse? And I love those types of philosophical questions that get brought up in these types of sci-fi novels. I love the idea of playing with technology that could be possible and questioning, like, is this something that we truly want, or are we really not thinking through all the potential consequences? I think that this one, crossing my fingers, might be my favorite Blake Crouch yet. I'm just so excited after hearing that interview. So I highly recommend, if you are also a Blake Crouch fan, if you're looking forward to this book or have already read it, go check out that episode that I will link down below, because it was so much fun listening to Blake Crouch talk about his book. All right, so now let's get into the list of my best books of 2022 so far. I'm going to go in chronological order because that is the only way I really know how to do this. So let's start with Theft of Swords by Michael J. Sullivan. You can just assume that every Michael J. Sullivan book I read is going to be on this list. He is a new favorite author of mine. I love this world that he's created of Elon and just exploring all these characters. I think his character work is amazing in his books. So Theft of Swords and the entire Legends of the First Empire series obviously takes first spot here. I don't feel like I have to talk much more about it. I've talked about this series and Michael J. Sullivan already so much, so we're just gonna move right on to the next one. Next one I have is The Push by Ashley Audrain, which is a really, really dark, gritty thriller that is themed around motherhood and has like disturbed children. So if that is something that you like to explore, the darker side of motherhood, this is definitely a good one, but it has a lot of really dark and gruesome content, so please be warned. But I really enjoyed this. I thought that the themes of motherhood were executed so well, so I loved this. Also, The Bone Shard Daughter by Andrea Stewart. This one was a standout fantasy for me. I absolutely love this adult fantasy that has a really unique magic system. It has some horror elements to it. It has this really engrossing mystery that keeps you captivated throughout, and it has an adorable animal companion. So what more can you want? I loved The Bone Shard Daughter. Runaway by Harlan Coben. I talked about this one in my mid-year freakout tag, but this was a total surprise to me, 5 stars. This is a thriller that follows a father who's looking for his runaway daughter who's into drugs and gets gets caught up in this larger conspiracy, and it is just, you can't put it down. I had to keep flipping the pages. I was so invested from start to finish. Guns of the Dawn by Adrian Tchaikovsky, I've already talked about at length as well, but if you like the idea of a Jane Austen character being put into a military fantasy novel, then this is the book for you. I absolutely love the main character. I loved the action and the political intrigue throughout this one. I thought it was fantastic and such a good standalone fantasy. We have The Love Hypothesis by Ellie Hazelwood. I just thought that this was absolutely adorable. I loved the chemistry between the two main characters, and I loved the two main characters themselves. I was smiling throughout this book. I think it totally deserves the hype. I highly recommend checking this one out if you're just looking for a adorable romance that will keep you smiling. The Spider by Leo Carew. This is the second book in the Under the Northern Sky trilogy, and this is an adult fantasy that very much feels more like a historical fantasy, because it takes the idea of what if Neanderthals still exist in our world, and what if human species goes to war against the Neanderthals. And what I love about this series is the questions of, like, what is the right side? I love the politics. I love the military strategies that are explored throughout this book. I thought that The Spider, the second book in the series, improved upon everything from the first book. The characters were amazing. The politics were amazing. It all worked for me. I was hooked from beginning to end, so I absolutely love this one. Transcendent Kingdom by Jassi. This is one that I absolutely loved. I also loved Homegoing by the same author. This one, not quite as much as Homegoing, but I still really enjoyed it. It follows a woman who comes from a very religious family, but she herself is kind of on this coming of age journey and is questioning her own beliefs and navigating the world around her. So you are very much following these characters. It's very much focused on, like, the family dynamics and relationships of these characters. I loved it because I loved the character work. I thought it was outstanding. So I highly recommend this one for any of you who are character-driven readers who love those types of coming-of-age exploratory type stories. Somebody's Daughter by Ashley C. Ford was a beautifully written memoir about a woman who, her father very early on in her life is incarcerated, and she is growing up in the absence of her father, and that absence is kind of looming over her and really defines a lot of her journey. But it's very much, once again, this author exploring her coming of age story, and I just thought it was so beautifully told that I was engrossed throughout. So highly recommend this one for any memoir fans. Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. I'm so glad I finally read this one. I absolutely love Anne. I can totally see why Anne may not work for some people, but I loved her. I loved all of her dramatics. I loved her personality, and I just thought that this was such a sweet story. So I loved Anne of Green Gables. Definitely recommend this one as a great starter classic. If you are intimidated by classics, this is more of a children's classic, so it's not quite so intimidating and hard to get into. Dead Silence by S.A. Barnes. This is a sci-fi horror that I think leans more into the horror side of the genre, and it gave me exactly the paranormal horror vibes I was looking for. It is basically a haunted Titanic story in space, and it is just so creepy. I loved the visuals. I loved the twists and turns and the way it was told. It's kind of told in this non-linear way, and I just thought it was so well done. So I really liked the creepy aspects of this one. I think that the sci-fi elements could have been done a little bit better, but the horror elements for me was where this book shined. So highly recommend this one for any sci-fi horror fans. My Lovely Wife by Samantha Downing. I thought that this was just so engaging throughout. I was totally engrossed in this story. I thought that the dynamics between this family were so fascinating to explore. I really liked having an entire family that was included in this book. You're not just following a husband and wife, you're also following the children of this family. So I just thought it was really well done. I really liked the ending. It was intense. It was gripping. So I had a lot of fun with this one. The Maid by Nita Prose. This is the one where Molly the Maid is, I think, going to make or break this story for you. For me personally, Molly the Maid is one of my favorite characters of all time. I think she's amazing. So this, for me, I connected to it so much because of Molly and just loved her throughout. So this one made me sob. It made me laugh. I loved it so much. Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Once again, Taylor Jenkins Reid just creates the most real characters. They feel like they could be real people that you could Google right now today. They're just so well done, and the messy family dynamics in this one were really, really well done. So I love Malibu Rising. I still think I like Daisy Jones and the Six more, but this is definitely a great one for any Taylor Jenkins Reid fans. I will say that the end of the story can maybe make or break it for you. I've seen a lot of people have mixed feelings about the second half of this story, but I really liked it throughout, so I would highly recommend this one. A Dark Queen Rises by Ashok K. Banker, which is the second book in the Burnt Empire saga. This is an epic adult fantasy that is inspired by the Indian epic, the Mahabharata, and it is truly epic in every sense of the word. You are following a different cast of characters in this book than you are following from the first book, but you're still familiar with who these characters are from the first book, but you get much more of their side of the story. And I really, again, enjoyed this immensely. The writing style is just so beautiful and so unique and unlike anything I've ever read before, especially the mythology around this world and these characters, and the magic is just so different than anything else I've read in fantasy that I was just so intrigued throughout. And I think that the villains are written so well in this one. You just absolutely love to hate the villains, and you're really rooting for the good guys in this story. So I highly recommend this series. The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna. Kristen Hanna is definitely one of my favorite authors. This is a historical fiction that takes place around the Dust Bowl era, and you're following a family who lives in Texas during that time, and it's basically a survival story, and I love Kristen Hanna's character work. I think her characters are beautiful, strong, courageous, and I just love them. So this one for me is another standout Kristen Hanna story. I think she writes such strong mothers, and I loved that exploration of mothers. So definitely recommend this one. All right, moving into April, we'll start with The Passengers by John Mars. This is like a Black Mirror episode. If you like Black Mirror on Netflix, I think you're going to love The Passengers. This is a near future sci-fi thriller where we're in London, where self-driving cars are now the standard. And at the very beginning of the novel, I think there's 8 people in self-driving cars that end up getting hacked by a terrorist who is an unknown identity. And so you're basically following their fight for survival as the terrorist that hacks into these cars makes a deal with this government agency where the general public has to vote on one of these people in these self-driving cars to survive, while the others will be killed. So it's really intense throughout. I loved the twists and turns of this one. I thought it was really, really well done. I just was at the edge of my seat, and every character I just like really felt for. So I'm very excited to read more of John Mars. And again, if you like the Black Mirror vibes, this is definitely a good one. The Book of Gold Cases by Simone St. James. I love Simone St. James's adult thrillers. She definitely leans paranormal, and I so appreciate that. I love a good creepy ghost story, and this one does the same thing that Simone St. James does in her other novels, where it follows a dual timeline, and I love the way she plays with these dual timelines where you're finding out information in the past that leads you to more revelations in the future, and it's just so well done in my opinion. So I love the ending of this one. I loved the main character of this one. I just thought it was really creepy and intriguing. So highly recommend this one if you like any of Simone St. James's other books, but especially if you like paranormal thrillers. Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. Talia Hibbert's sense of humor totally works for me. I thought that this story was absolutely adorable. I loved both of the main characters, and I just loved the humor throughout this book. It totally worked for me. So sense of humor is so subjective, so it's gonna be different for everyone, but I loved this story. I loved the banter between these two main characters. I thought it was the sweetest romance. So I was smiling throughout this one. It made me so happy. So I would highly recommend Get a Life, Chloe Brown. Nevermore by Jessica Townsend. I finally read this this extremely popular middle grade fantasy series, and while I may not love it as much as everyone else, I still found it so charming, so sweet, and I loved the imagination of this author. I thought that this portal fantasy world was so different and fun and just had all that whimsy that I was expecting. I loved the competition trope that was used in this book. I think that there could have been a little bit more focus on the friendships in this book, but other than that, I thought it was really adorable and sweet, so definitely a middle grade I would recommend. Finley Donovan is Killing It by El Casamano. So this is a really funny mystery that feels more like a cozy mystery than anything else. You are following a romantic suspense author who is pitching her new novel idea to her agent at a Panera and gets overheard by someone, and by their conversation, it sounds like Finley Donovan is actually a hit woman. So she gets hired by the stranger to kill the stranger's husband for a ton of money, and hijinks ensue from there. It's an absolutely ridiculous premise, but if you suspend your disbelief, it is a ton of fun. And while there are a ton of plot conveniences in this one, I just had a good time with it. It was fun to just go for the ride with these characters who definitely made me laugh. They felt very relatable at times, so I just found it a fun ride. Jar of Hearts by Jennifer Hillier. This was a really well written but very dark adult thriller that follows some really dark themes that I would make sure to check any content warnings before going into this one. But I thought it was just so well written and so well executed, even touching on those darker themes. So this is one where I'm definitely intrigued by this author's writing style and her stories, and would love to check out more from Jennifer Hillier. But this one overall, I was really surprised by the ending, and I really enjoyed the journey throughout. I thought that the character work was well done, and again, even though it got really uncomfortable at times, I always thought it was well done. So this is one that I would recommend if you are okay with a lot of the darker content. Kaikeyi by Vaishnavi Patel. This is a debut adult fantasy that takes this famous character from the Indian epic, the Ramayana, and tells her side of the story. And I just thought that this writing style was beautiful. I loved the character of Kaikeyi. I loved exploring a lot of the family dynamics throughout this one, and you really do sympathize with Kaikeyi as you're following her story. I just thought it was really beautifully done. So I would highly recommend this one. It wasn't a new favorite for me. I had a couple of issues with it, but overall this was a fantastic debut, and I'm very interested in reading more from this author. Moving on to Blood Heir by Amelie Wenzel. I thought that this YA fantasy was really good. So this is one that reminded me a lot of the Shadow and Bone series by Leigh Bardugo. It felt very similar world building wise, and a lot of the tropes that are in here are very much YA tropes, but it's told in a way that feels a little bit more mature. It gets a little bit darker and goes there a lot more than I've seen maybe other young adult stories go. So I definitely think that there's a lot of crossover appeal with this one, where if you typically read adult fantasy but you like dipping your toes into YA every now and then, this is a good one. This is a more mature, I think, Shadow and Bone. And definitely there's real consequences that these characters face in this book, and there's a lot of really well done politicking and themes that are explored in this one. So I'm very intrigued by this and definitely plan to finish out this trilogy. Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. Beautiful story. This one is a contemporary that follows two twin sisters, both of which are white passing, but one of them decides to live their life as a white woman while the other decides to live their life as a black woman, and you follow both of their stories and how that affects their journey as they grow. And it's just a really well told story that focuses a lot on characters I wasn't expecting it to, that I absolutely loved getting their perspectives of, and again, just themes that were really well done. So I highly recommend this one to any adult contemporary fans. Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston. This is my favorite middle grade fantasy that I've read so far this year. It is absolutely adorable. I thought Amari was an amazing main character. It's following her as she is trying to find her missing brother, and she ends up in this portal world where there's a bunch of supernatural creatures that exist, and she finds out more about herself through this. It's so fantastic. I love the whimsy, I love the themes, I love the character work. Truly, I think that this is a perfect middle grade fantasy. Educated by Tara Westover, an amazing memoir about a woman who grows up in a Mormon survivalist family who her mom and dad really didn't believe in the government. They very much thought the government was a larger conspiracy and did not trust the schooling, did not trust modern medicine and doctors. So they grew up very isolated in this rural part of Idaho, and it's about Tara Westover kind of breaking free of that and trying to find herself an education. It's a gorgeous journey, and you just can't believe what she went through and how she ended up. So I would just recommend this to anyone, really. It's truly an astounding story. The Unsinkable Greta James by Jennifer E. Smith. I thought that this one did a beautiful job of exploring grief. I think that that is very much the central theme of this book, so if that's not something you're looking for, then I don't necessarily recommend it, but it deals with death of a parent, and it's very much about Greta James going on this journey through this grief as she's dealing with the aftermath of losing a parent, and it's just a really beautiful story. There's a romance in there that I don't necessarily love, but other than that, I think it's a really nice story, and I loved the family relationships that were examined in this one, so it made me very emotional. I really loved it. Firefly Lane by Kristen Hanna. This is another one that I read very recently. This is a gorgeous story, but Kristen Hanna, man oh man, she does tell sad stories, but this one is like extra sad. So definitely check content warnings before going into this one. But what Kristen Hanna always does so well is characters, and these characters are so believable. Their relationship that you get to examine through multiple decades of their lives. It follows two best friends from teenage years, and you follow their lives through multiple decades as they go through ups and downs, but always have each other, and it's just so sad, but so beautiful, and I always love Kristen Hanna books, but this one definitely made me the saddest. All right, so that brings us through the end of June. Those are all of the best books I've read so far this year. Did you see any that you've read before? What did you think of my list? And what are some of your best books that you've read this year? I would love to know, so leave those comments down below. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like to, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye.